Hello, my name is Carrie and welcome to my channel. Today I am going to be talking about why I want to read more nonfiction in 2026 and what specific nonfiction books I am thinking about picking up this year. First, I want to talk about why am I feeling this push to nonfiction in 2026, because I think this is something that a lot of readers are feeling right now, and I am recording this in the very early days of 2026, so I've had a little bit of time to think about this. That's why this video is coming out a little bit later than I expected, because I have been really reflecting on this and why I feel this push, why these specific books are books that I am really intrigued by. And the short answer is that I feel like in 2025, I was not interested in learning. And that is really hard to say, because not only is education a part of my career, I am an ESL teacher and I'm really passionate about teaching and about learning in students, but I think I was going through a bit of a rough patch in 2025 in understanding what I wanted to learn more about next. I feel pretty content with the level of education that I have. I have been doing professional development in an area that really interests me over the last year. However, outside of my work and the hobbies that I have, I don't feel like I am learning a lot else about the world around me or about certain things that maybe interest me and I've wanted to learn about, but I have delayed actually studying anything. This became really obvious to me in 2025, where I found myself really pulling away from nonfiction. I did not feel like I wanted to read a lot of nonfiction. I read, I think, 10 or 11 books out of the 130 plus books that I read in total last year. A very small portion of them were actually nonfiction. And the trend that I noticed with the nonfiction that I picked up was that I wasn't really enjoying them. A lot of them were books on subjects that I already felt like I had read very similar things about, or maybe a little bit too much of a certain perspective or a certain topic, where I felt like there wasn't anything new expanding my perspective. This made me a little bit burnt out on nonfiction. I believe also I was turning so much to poetry last year as a kind of bridge between nonfiction and fiction, because many poetry collections are based on someone's lived experiences. But that was also really falling into a comfort zone where there were things that I was just largely ignoring learning more about. I really disliked that. That was one of the things that unsettled me the most last year about my reading, is that I feel like I really stagnated in learning more things. And I don't mean this to say that every book I read should be teaching me something, or that every book that I read should have, some critical analysis or deep examination of something that I want to learn about in life. I don't think every book serves that purpose. Books offer worlds of wisdom in them, whether it's teaching you about something, showing you a different perspective, or just showing you an experience that feels really raw and emotional and vulnerable and similar to something you've been through. I think that reading has a different function for different people. And I'm not saying that every book needs to be very highbrow or something that is intentionally educating you, because I think that kind of falls into a trap of turning a hobby into something that has a greater purpose behind it. And that purpose could be positive or negative depending on how obsessive you become with it. So I was reflecting on more so how I felt about my reading and what I was reading. And I found that last year I read a lot of books, the most I've ever read. However, I didn't really feel that happy with what I was taking away from many of those books. There were quite a few books that I wanted to read and that I had been looking forward to, and I just kept putting off, and I wasn't really sure why. So this is where this kind of challenge came in, of challenging myself in 2026 to read more nonfiction. And I use the word challenge very lightly here, because I don't want this to feel like a challenge. I want this to feel like I'm nurturing this quest for knowledge in myself, and that I am exploring things that are actually interesting to me. So a big part of that is reading more nonfiction. And there are certain genres of nonfiction that I wanted to explore more of, or maybe just different topics that I think are big information gaps for me that I would like to fill. Some of them are just personal things that I'm curious about. It's something that I think that a lot of people are so afraid to admit, that they don't know much about certain aspects of the world or history, or even skills that exist and that are still very prevalent today or necessary. I don't know a lot about a lot of things in the world, and that is something that I would like to improve on slowly. Obviously, I'm not going to learn everything everywhere all at once, but there are specific things that I'm curious about and would like to know more of. And that is what really has guided my picks for what I want to pick up in 2026. At the end of 2025 and the beginning of 2026, there were quite a few people who I saw creating nonfiction challenges. A lot of people were having these debates online about reading more nonfiction or reading less nonfiction, or what type of nonfiction is best to read right now. And 2026 has been a really hard start to the year. That's a part of why this video is very delayed. I have felt really like 2026 has been rough, and it's been challenging to see the state of the world and exist every day and go to work. And I can't deny that difficulty and that struggle and the grief and despair that I think many people are feeling in moments like this right now. I really felt that that needed to be reflected in my reading. And what I mean by that is that I needed reading that was not so centered on politics. I needed reading that was much more about people and about lives and about things that I feel like I need to know about. Some of these topics are difficult topics to read about, and some of them I think are going to be very sad and hard reads. But there are others that I think will bring joy and that will have an effect that is more positive. And I think it's very important to strike that balance. I have made some changes to my plans for nonfiction to reflect that. I have looked at a few different challenges. One of the challenges that I really felt like I related the most to, and you'll see the most of in this list, is Queerology's 2026 Year of Nonfiction Challenge that I think was really well done and carefully crafted. I have used a lot of the prompts from that to guide my own creation of a list here for, I guess you could call it a bingo board. It's not really a bingo board. It's more of just like topics that I want to read about that I'm kind of crossing off. Because I tried to make it a bingo board in my reading journal for the year and it looks terrible. I apparently have never seen a bingo board before in my life. So this is more just like guided prompts, and I chose about 3 books for every prompt, and I'm gonna explain not really in detail about these books, but just kind of why I picked them and what has intrigued me about them. So I guess this is the part where we are gonna now go over to the categories and the books within them. So the first category that I chose is clothing. And I kind of chose very random books for this in the grand scheme of things. The first one is more of a micro history, and that is Pockets, an Intimate History of How We Keep Things Close. This is by Hannah Carlson. This is exactly what it says. It's a history of pockets, but it's also more of a sociological study of pockets and why we started using them and what purpose they have for us, what it says about society that we deemed that we needed to keep certain things on our person at all times. It's something that I take for granted. I think especially for women, it's hard because nowadays more and more of our clothing doesn't have pockets. And so it's kind of this weird transition where it's something that used to be very popular and now it's kind of fading away. And so I think many of us have taken this for granted. And I'm curious if this will be discussed in the book as well, because it's definitely a trend that I've noticed in women's clothing. The next one is more to do with fashion in general, and that is From the Runway to the Res by Christian Allaire. This is a look at Christian Allaire's career as a fashion journalist and writer for Vogue, and the kind of trends in clothing and fashion that they've noticed, and also how fashion has become a way for certain designers and houses to preserve culture and tradition through their clothing. Because Christian Allaire is an Indigenous fashion writer, and so I believe it's discussing this kind of transition from more aesthetic, performance-based fashion to more intentionality behind fashion, which I think will be really interesting. And the last one in this category is Worn, A People's History of Clothing by Sofi Thanhauser. I am really looking forward to this one because it is more of a macro history of clothing through fabric. A good friend of mine from Bookstagram, her name is Salima. Her Instagram is GT Reader. I will link it down below. She is so lovely. She has also been trying to read more nonfiction, and she and I were talking about this one because I have heard of this book before and I have heard very good things about it, but it's a little bit difficult to find it, especially where I'm currently living. And so I was asking her, what were her thoughts on it, because she was reading through the book at the time and she really loved this. And she explained more that this book is about not just the fabrics themselves and like where they come from, but also how clothing has fueled these capitalistic, consumeristic societies and kind of the overarching like supply chains that fuel these industries. And I think that's really fascinating in this because I was already interested in fabrics because I don't know like anything about different fabrics. Growing up in the United States, we're very far removed from the supply chain and the processes of making clothes, at least where I grew up. And so that alone was a big selling point of this book for me. But now knowing that it's more in depth than that, and it's comparing both the history and the kind of society's business industry that really popped up around clothing is even more of a selling point. The next category is language, and although this is always going to be a passion of mine, the 3 books that I chose for this were very intentional. The first one is Empires of the Word by Nicholas Oster. This is an examination of how language, or different languages I should say, have become universal languages, mostly through colonialism, and looking at how empires have an impact on language. I am approaching this one with some hesitation because this is a somewhat older book, and I'm unsure about Nicholas Oster's beliefs around colonialism, but it's nonetheless one that sounds interesting to me in this conversation that many in the ESL community are having about the future of English as a language, also as a field of study within academia. The next one is something that I'm really hoping is about phonetics, which is one of my favorite subcategories in linguistics, and that is 50 Sounds by Polly Barton, about Barton's experience, I believe, moving to Japan and also learning the Japanese language. I know for sure that most of this book is about her experience learning Japanese, and I believe the title 50 Sounds comes from the phonetic differences between English, which I believe is Barton's native language, and Japanese, and how phonetically they're very different. This is something that is really fascinating within linguistics, is the phonetics and how certain languages mean having certain letter sounds or lack of letter sounds. And I don't know that that's necessarily what Polly Barton will get into here, but I am still interested in learning about her journey learning Japanese. And the last one in this category is Language City by Ross Perlin. This is a book examining the endangered languages that can be found in New York City, the communities that surround these languages, and why New York City has become a hub for these languages. There are many endangered languages both within the United States, but also within the world as a whole. And there's a disproportionate amount of people within New York City who speak endangered languages, which is how this book came to be. And I find this to be, again, another interesting subgenre within the study of linguistics. The fact that some languages have died out or are near extinction, and the kinds of efforts that are being made to help these languages survive, and the culture and traditions that go along with them. After that, we have the category of disabled living. And the first one in this is by the late Alice Wong, who unfortunately passed away very recently. This is her short story collection, Disability Visibility, which was edited by Wong, but it is in collaboration with many differently abled authors. This is just a collection of essays that are about different authors and their lives living with a disability, and what that has meant for them in terms of their visibility in society or the lack thereof. I have been wanting to read Alice Wong's work for a very long time, and her recent passing has highlighted to me that I need to make more of an effort to read her works. I have only read some articles from her here and there, and some short pieces that are in other anthologies. So this is one that I wanted to read more of. There are also some other differently abled authors in this that I've read from before, and I would love to read more from as well. And the last one in this category is Care Work by Leah, Lakshmi, Piepzna. I believe I have read something by this author before, or it was part of a collected work, because this author's name really rings a bell to me, but I can't place it in this moment. This is about both taking care of yourself if you're living with a disability, but also taking care of other people, whether they have a disability or they need other types of community care. And the central focus of this book is that care work is necessary to build community, and it's an important part of not just taking care of people because you believe that they deserve help and care and love and support, but also in how that then creates better, loving, and more supportive communities, which I think is something that I have been really trying to work on in recognizing lack of accessibility in places that I live or places that I work, and how that is something that is being really largely ignored and why this is a problem. So I'm hoping that this will give me some guidance in how to approach this better and what care work actually looks like in practice. After that category, I have Queer Life. The first one in this is How to Survive a Plague by David France. This is an epic book that is examining the AIDS epidemic in the United States and the systemic failures of the American government to both help and protect people living with AIDS, but also the victims, their families, the federal response to the AIDS crisis, and the complete mismanagement of this epidemic. And I don't know anything really about the AIDS crisis. I know bits and pieces here and there from certain media, but I was not taught about it in school, and there's now much more information about this. And this is a very comprehensive history that I think is really important in reminding us of the importance of community care, similar to care work. During the AIDS crisis, I do know that there were many people who pushed back against this stigma of LGBTQ+ people, and they realized like, like so much of this justification was based on homophobia, and it wasn't a moral failing of these people to contract this illness. Communities needed to come together to support one another. I think this will be a really great reminder of the importance of that community care and in understanding history that for a long time the government didn't want us to think about or talk about. Next up, I have Hijab, Butch Blues by Lamya H. This is an anonymous queer Muslim memoir that is reconciling queerness with faith in Islam. And there's parts of this that are quoting both the Quran and I believe also the Hadiths in discussing queerness within Islam and the fact that it exists and that there are queer Muslims and that this is not a community that we can deny existence to. This book was released with a lot of debate surrounding it. I think that it was very brave of this author to publish this and to start this conversation that many Muslim communities are having, and I want to read about their experiences. The last one in this category is A History of My Brief Body by Billie Belcourt. This is about Belcourt's experience growing up as an indigenous queer person in, I believe, present-day Canada. This author is very well known for their poetry and fiction as well, but I've heard that this nonfiction memoir is really beautiful and a really introspective look at Belcourt's life and the life of Indigenous queer people within Canada specifically, which is something I don't know much about. I read some of Belcourt's poetry, but this would be my first long form work, so I'm hoping that it lives up to the hype. The next category is essay collections, and this is pretty broad for a reason because there are a lot of essay collections that I have, again, on my physical shelves or digitally that I can't really justify as one specific topic, but I find their topics very interesting, even though there's not like a guiding through line between these books. The first one I want to talk about is Are Women on the Ground, which is edited by Zahra Hankir. This is all about Arab women who are reporting in the Arab world. So we're talking photojournalists, war correspondents, news anchors that are reporting across different Arab countries, and they are of Arab origin themselves. This is a part of like a bigger trend that I've been noticing in what I've been wanting to read recently. This kind of happened with Susan Sontag's book regarding the pain of others. I became really interested in photojournalism, journalism, photography, war correspondence, like all of these things, because I realize it's a field I don't really know much about. And I actually bought Are Women on the Ground many years ago now. I bought it because there was a booktuber I was watching at the time. I don't remember who it was, but they were talking about this book and about how it really pushed back at a lot of the stereotypings of Arab cultures, of Arab women that at the time were really such a big problem in the United States. And it was an interesting reflection on these careers and the importance of these careers in representing not just news from various people, but also in the way that certain women's stories were then brought to news outlets and reported on in ways that 20 years ago would not have really been a thing. And Zahra Hankir is a writer who I have followed really since I bought Are Women on the Ground. She's written another book now that I'm also interested in. But this is the one that I would really like to prioritize. I even brought it back with me this summer from the States because I was like, you need to read this in the next year. You have to do it. The next one is I Don't Want to Die Poor by Michael Arcenaux. This is about the author's experience growing up in generational poverty with a complete lack of any financial literacy and how this impacted them as an adult who struggled with financial stability and increasing debt. I have become really interested in this because, first of all, I'm a teacher, so I'm definitely not making, millions of dollars every year, but I have reached an age where I do feel like I am much more conscious of my finances. I am much more careful about what I spend, big money on in terms of like experiences or trips or purchases, things like that. I try to be much more responsible with this because when I was younger, I really had a very bad shopping problem. And I am at an age now where I have many friends and associates from university and high school who are struggling with money. I find that it is something in my generation people are talking about a little bit more because I think there's a little bit less shame behind it. Like, we're all aware of the economic crises that are happening, and so we're having more honest conversations about personal finances. But I find that often people are still very weird about this and they feel very uncomfortable talking about money. And I don't like being one of those people. I believe like you should be honest about the budget that you can live in and the things you can afford to do. And like your friends and family should be understanding of that instead of like shaming you for this. So this is something that I wanted to read to kind of like more reflect on my own beliefs around this and also about like this kind of generational thing that I've been noticing because I think it's really important to not feel shame around money. So I'm hoping that this book will kind of unpack some of those conversations that maybe the author had to have with family friends themselves to really examine and reflect on in this experience. The last one in this category is Things That Disappear by Jenny Erpenbeck. Jenny Erpenbeck is one of my favorite modern German writers. I have examined her work more for undergraduate studies, where I looked at how she expresses East German identity and this kind of sense of detachment from the period of reunification in Germany. I just really admire her work and her writing, and I think that she is an author that is really underhyped in terms of both in Germany and also abroad. I will be reading this in the original German version, which I'm very lucky to be able to do so. But I really love that because I think in German there is such a way that she has with language that is just really well done in getting you to understand like the more metaphor or allegory, I guess you could say, to her storytelling. And I'm curious how that will work in nonfiction here. This is a collection of essays that are looking back on different phases of life and the things that disappear over time as we age, as we maybe move, friendships, relationships change. And I think it's going to have that language of, you know, like despair and longing and deep emotion that I come to associate with Erpenbeck's writing. But this is very short. It's only, I think, like 70 pages. So I'm curious how big of a punch she's going to pack in such a short book. Of course, no nonfiction list for me would be complete without some type of category related to food. I really enjoy food writing, both in fiction and nonfiction, and I kind of took a break last year from reading nonfiction about food. I'm not sure why. I think I was starting to feel very overwhelmed because I had a lot of books on my shelves, and a lot of them were books that I just felt were very similar to each other. And so I tried to really go through recently and pick apart books that I am genuinely interested in beyond just that I've had them on my shelves forever or that they're from like a famous chef. So the list of books that I selected here are not so much memoirs related to food. Most of them are actually about different relationships with food or different aspects of food that people may not always be familiar with. So the first one is Be My Guest by Priya Basil. This is a book that is all about reflecting on hosting, how hosting creates this community, not only just around food, but also with people. It is a place where you start to have conversations, you get to know people more deeply, you can understand people's culture and their beliefs around food and the food that they bring to these things. And I am someone who really enjoys hosting. I really love making food for other people and spending time with them, enjoying that food. I enjoy learning about how to make dishes from other cultures and the practices that go into making those dishes and why certain places have certain techniques for the way that they cook or certain spices, things like this. It's something so fascinating to me, and I think that this book is going to be right up my alley in terms of understanding why hosting is something that I find really impactful and has definitely helped me in community building. The next two books kind of go together because both of them are looking at supply chain issues in food. The first one is Wild Chocolate by Rowan Jacobsen. This is kind of a short history and a supply chain introspective look at the chocolate industry and how it became an industry, but then also the more problematic nature nowadays with chocolate. This feels especially timely as around the world chocolate prices are rapidly increasing because of some issues with cacao. And I am a chocolate lover for sure. I don't know almost anything about it though. And so I thought that this would be something really interesting to understand, you know, where did this come from and why is it now becoming a little more problematic to get chocolate? Along with that, I also chose Endangered Eating by Sarah Lohman. This is about specific foods, I believe in the United States, but I could be wrong. It might be more expansive than that. But these foods are becoming endangered, and Sarah Lohman is looking at why specific foods are in danger of becoming endangered. I just realized in danger of becoming endangered. That's kind of funny. Anyway, I, in the last few years, have really tried to educate myself a lot better on shopping seasonally and being aware of seasonal produce so that I could be a little bit more conscious of what I'm consuming. And I believe that this book touches on that and the importance behind that, but also in how there are many foods that, like, it doesn't matter even if you're shopping seasonally, it's that there's climate change or there's other larger issues that are causing the lack of production or the lack of fertilization of some of these crops. And so we may just experience food disappearing for reasons beyond our individual control, which is something that I would like to learn more about. After that, we have technology. The first in this one is a book that has been everywhere recently, and it is Careless People by Sarah Wynn-Williams, the famous memoir from a former Facebook/Meta employee. And she was let go by Facebook and Meta in, I think, like 2018, I want to say. I could be wrong. It's about her time working for this company, what led her to work there, and kind of the corrosive nature of working in this place. Yeah, I'm gonna join the hype and see what this book is about. The other one in this category, because this one I only chose two because I really, I'm kind of over technology, but these were two books that I thought were really important to read about. The second one being The New Age of Sexism, How AI and Emerging Technologies Are Reinventing Misogyny by Laura Bates. Laura Bates is very well known, and this is about the capabilities of AI when we think about it being used for revenge on former partners, to create certain images or videos that are released online that are incredibly problematic, how it's being used to over-sexualize people. It's talking about the capabilities of this and why it's a problem that this is so unregulated, and what happens when these things happen to women and there's no recourse for it. There's no legal way to hold these people accountable, and there's no regulation of the AI, so it's just allowed to collect this information and take it without people's consent as well, which is really scary, but I think really necessary to understand more of, because so many people thought that AI would be limited to education, and as we see, it has so far surpassed education, and it's incredibly problematic how it's integrated into so many different aspects of life. After that, I left open a free space, and I do have some books in mind for this that I just didn't feel like went with any other category that I was already considering. So the first one is The Black Count by Tom Rice. This is a biography of Alexander Dumas' father, and Alexander Dumas was heavily inspired by his father's real lived experience to create The Count of Monte Cristo. And I've heard that this book is a necessary contextualizing read for The Count of Monte Cristo to understand some of the events that are going on in there, the context of society and things like this. And I would like to read both of these books this year. I'm hoping to maybe make this a summer project or a fall project, but we will see how the dice rolls out. But I definitely want to read The Black Count before starting The Count of Monte Cristo. The next one is Black in Blues by Imani Perry. This is connecting the history of the color blue and the concept of blackness to each other, and discussing this kind of intertwined relationship between the two in public perception. And I don't really know anything about colors or color theory or anything. I'm not sure if this book will go into that, but I have heard really high praise for this, and I thought it just sounded like an interesting concept. After that one, I have Trainwreck: The Women We Love to Hate, Mock and Fear, and Why by Sadie Doyle. This is a book that I have been looking at getting for years, because it is all about the early 2000s, hypersexualization of women, and then the over-demonization of them once they have mental breakdowns or struggles with addictions that are brought to light. Sadie Doyle is examining why do we love to attack and berate these women that are clearly going through these public breakdowns and this public harassment by the media. The biggest hindrance to me reading this book is that I need a physical or ebook copy of it. My library in the States has access to the audiobook, but the narrator, no, I cannot do it. I feel so bad, but I literally cannot listen to this woman. And so I have been waiting for my library to have an ebook version available. I might just get one online. And the last one in this category is With Her Own Hands, Women Weaving Their Stories by Nicole Nerig. And this is a look at how different types of crafts have formed these collectives for women who, for some of them, it's meant a way for them to earn money, which has meant a way to gain independence or liberation from certain circumstances. But it's more so about how crafting in general creates community and autonomy for women. And I think that that is just really lovely. I am someone who loves to craft. I have done many craft courses, and I have literally a craft room in my home. And this just sounds like it's going to be a really lovely read that will teach me a lot about the history, I believe, of weaving specifically in this. After my free space of fun, I have Indigenous knowledge and history. So the first book in this is We Will Be Jaguars by Namonte Nikimo. And this is from an Indigenous activist who has become very famous for her advocacy work for the Indigenous communities within the Amazon and the fight against climate change and government policies encroaching on Indigenous land, but also causing further climate change damage. And I don't really know much about Amazon. I know there's some problematic issues with the government and the way that they view this land, but I don't really know anything about the Indigenous communities that are living there. So I thought that this would be an eye-opening read to learn about a perspective I truly know nothing about. The next one is By the Fire We Carry by Rebecca Nagel, and this is about the fight for protection of tribal lands and sovereignty. I do not know how extensive this is, because I believe the author is focusing on a very specific legal case, and then from there kind of moving forward through time. I could totally be wrong about that, but I don't know much beyond the restrictions of tribal lands in the United States beyond the Trail of Tears and like the forced relocation of Native Americans in the United States. So I'm hoping that this will give me a little bit more information about how exactly tribal lands were determined by the government, what sovereignty looks like in these places, and how like government encroachment may or may not be happening in these places, and especially how they may have changed over time. And last but not least in this category is an author that I truly love, and that is Haunani K. Trask. This is a collection of her nonfiction, I believe like speeches, essays, etc. It's called From a Native Daughter, and this is all about Hawaii's colonial history and hopes for sovereignty. Haunani K. Trask, unfortunately, who passed away many years ago now, was an activist for the Hawaiian sovereignty movement. I have read many of her poetry collections and really enjoyed them, and this will be my first collection of her nonfiction works that I would like to read, because she's just truly a profound writer and was such an important voice in Hawaiian history. After that one, I have Media Critiques. And the first two are both by Susan Sontag, because I want to read more of Susan Sontag's work this year. The first one is Against Interpretation, which this is kind of a collection of notes of different aspects of media and culture that Susan Sontag was writing about. And the other one is on photography, which is much more focused on Sontag's reflections on the photographic field and how it evolved over time, what photography means in the more modern era, both of which sound really interesting to me. And I, again, want to read like everything she's ever written. So this is a good place to continue that. The next one is Cue the Sun, The Invention of Reality TV by Emily Nussbaum. This is about how reality TV became a concept, how it was then marketed and sold to people, and now how it has become very addicting. And there's like a proliferation of so many different types of reality TV. I have seen other works like this in recent years, but most of them seem focused on a very specific franchise within reality TV rather than like looking at the phenomenon as a whole. And so I'm hoping that this one will examine it more at a macro level instead of like these individual shows and series. Last in this category is This Is Not Propaganda by Peter Pomerantsev. This is about how propaganda has been perpetuated by social media. It's specifically looking at the influence of propaganda on elections and misinformation within Russia and like coming from Russia, why this is becoming like a problematic trend in the 21st century. I think this is going to pair well with Careless people. They seem to be kind of circumnavigating the same things of social media becoming more influential in politics, and unfortunately that this has devastating consequences when we think about media literacy, misinformation, and the lack of, again, regulation and clear boundaries or guidelines regarding these things. After that, I have sports. And the first one in this is Das Reboot, How German Football Reinvented Itself and Conquered the World. This is by Raphael Honigstein, I think. And this book is kind of funny to me because it was written shortly after the World Cup win in 2014, where Germany won after a period of like a really long time of rebuilding the German national team, of cultivating German players that many people kind of underestimated because many of the players were very young. There was kind of a dismissiveness of the German national team, and they ended up winning the World Cup that year. This is examining this kind of transformation that happened in German football as it evolved over like, I think it's looking at like 20-ish years. It might be longer than that. I'm not actually 100% sure. But the unfortunate part of this book is that since this book's publication, the German national team has really struggled. There have been really big setbacks in terms of the national team, in terms of like conflicts between the players, between the German national team federation and the players and coaches and all of this stuff. And there's been kind of a plague on German football. And I'm very intrigued as to how this book is going to talk about the period just before that and what the author's beliefs or theories about this are going to be, because it kind of reminds me of Francis Fukuyama's The End of History, where like it's just a book with such a wrong prediction for what was going to happen that you have to kind of read it and be like, oh my god, this is so crazy, now reading it so much later. Another one in this category is The Other Olympians by Michael Waters. This is about queer Olympians throughout history, and I believe about how like they have competed in sports and what their lives were like. I heard a lot of talk about this for the most recent Olympics. There were quite a few people that were picking this one up and saying that it was very good. So yeah, I'm hoping that one will be as good as everyone claims. And the last one in this category is There's Always This Year by Hanif Abdurraqib. This is a book that I have here for so many sentimental reasons. One, I love Hanif Abdurraqib. I think he's truly one of the most amazing writers of this generation. His essays, his poetry are just so beautiful, and there is such a way that he approaches the world that is just so profoundly impactful in reading his words. I think that this book is going to be no exception to that. This one is a little bit more sentimental to me because I really love basketball, and this book is about basketball and supporting basketball, and what does it mean for the highs and lows of this sport, you know, the conversations, the communities that spiral around this. And yeah, I just really love this, and I think it's going to be a beautiful reflection on the sport. And although I'm more of a college basketball fan, and I think that this one will probably be more NBA focused, I still will enjoy reading it because, again, I love the sport no matter the age level, I guess you could say. But I also know that Hani Keeps writing is just going to be absolutely flawless. So I'm really excited for that one. On this list, I think this is the one that I am the most likely to read from all of these things, even though I've been putting it off for a while because I am almost out of books to read by him. So hard times, you know? The next category is Natural World, and the first one I have is one that I am so excited about. It is Rainbow Dust, 3 Centuries of British Butterflies by Peter Marin. This is all about the butterfly and its history in Britain, its importance, its symbolic nature, its life in Britain, and I love butterflies so much. I don't really associate butterflies with Britain, but it's fascinating to me that there is this kind of micro history on this insect, and I'm really intrigued as to what Peter Marin will discuss about this beautiful insect. Similarly, in terms of like not leaving the UK, I chose The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd. This is a part memoir, part love letter to the Cairngorms in Scotland, and this importance to the author of being in nature, being among these mountains, this natural world in Scotland that I really feel a connection to as well. I've been to Scotland multiple times. I've been to different parts of the islands and the Highlands, and I love it. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world, and I am hoping to read this and that will push me to really go back and visit there because I have really missed it. And I keep telling myself like, oh, you should make the time to go, you should do this, do that. But like the timing never really works out with my work schedule to do another trip there. So I'm hoping that this will remind me of why I need to take some time and go back. The last one in this category is Gathering Moss, A Natural and Cultural History of Mosses by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I love Robin Wall Kimmerer's writing. This is one I have stayed a little bit farther away from though, because I really do not like moss. I am kind of scared of it. It freaks me out, and I feel like this book might be like a humiliation ritual in getting comfy with moss, and I don't know if I'm quite ready for that. But I do love Kimmerer's writing, and I believe that like this is the person I should trust with learning more about this topic, because I think moss is pretty important, even if I'm constantly scared of it. The second to last category is health. The first one in this is one that is a book that I really, really want to read because I have a personal connection to it, but also I really, really do not want to read because I have a personal connection to it. And it is Doctored, Fraud, Arrogance, and Tragedy in the Quest to Cure Alzheimer's by Charles Piller. So this book is about the mind-blowing discovery in 2023 that a really important foundational research study that was done on Alzheimer's, they faked the results. And this whole team of researchers knew that the results were fake. They still published the research, and billions of dollars of not just research for Alzheimer's, but also research for Alzheimer's medications, pharmaceutical, like money, time, energy, research in academia, in healthcare, in all of these fields, billions of dollars. And I can't even conceptualize how many hours of wasted research was just like, it was like a house of cards that just collapsed because there was a pharmaceutical company, I believe, that was having a problem with a drug that they were trying to create for Alzheimer's. They couldn't figure out there was something wrong in the studies, and they went back to the original experiment, and they found that documents in the original experiment, they basically copied and pasted results and didn't change something in, like, I think it was one of the numbers on it or something like that. Or it might have just been that the image was literally like a copy paste of the previous one. They did this intentionally. And I was really angry when I first found out about this because my grandmother passed away in 2014 from Alzheimer's. There have been now many medications that they were encouraging Alzheimer's patients to take, or people who were at risk of Alzheimer's to take, that have been pulled from the market. Research studies that had done all of this like trial work, that had, you know, done like these invasive procedures on patients, that was for nothing. I feel very strongly about this. I'm still very angry about the original experiment and the researchers who showed a complete lack of ethics and care and consideration for the importance of what they did. Yeah, but at the same time, I do want to understand, why would someone do this? Why was it so important for them to publish a study that they knew was fraudulent? I don't know if this book will be perfect in addressing that, but I would like to still read it. The next two books are slightly different type of health book. The first one is The Joy of Movement by Kathy McGonigal. This is about how movement is not just good for us in terms of physical health, but also mental health, and more importantly, in building communities. And so the author is looking at these different types of movement and how they affect people, and how they can help you create community or deal with certain problems that you're facing, which I think is a beautiful way to look at movement. And I first heard about this from Olive, from a book Olive, and I believe that she really liked this one, so I have high praise, for it. And the last one here is Let's Get Physical: How Women Discovered Exercise and Reshaped the World by Danielle Friedman. This is a little bit of a newer release. I think it was released in the last couple of years, and it's all about the women's exercise movement. I think it's looking mostly at like the 80s and how, like, for example, like the Jane Fonda workouts and like certain movements became dominated by women in the exercise industry. But I think it's also looking at like early examples of this and how women have always had a very important role in exercise and the popularity of certain exercises. I am hoping that that one will be good. I did put in a request for my local library here to buy that one, and they have bought it. So I will wait about 8 months probably for them. It's been about like 4 months, so I have probably like a few more months before they actually buy it, but still, I am excited nonetheless. And the last category is memoir. It's been a while since I read a memoir, and the first one is The Third Gilmore Girl by Kelly Bishop. This is the actress who played Emily Gilmore in Gilmore Girls, and it's all about her life. I don't think it's specifically about her time on the Gilmore Girls, but just her life in general and her career. She seems really interesting to me, so I thought, why not? And I love Gilmore Girls so much. And the last book overall, after all of this time, is The Outrun by Amy Liptrot. This is about the author's connections to the Orkney Islands in Scotland, and I believe that she at one point goes there and basically tries to overcome her addiction by living there and trying to survive. Her kind of intertwined dynamic with both the islands itself, but also her addiction, and separating the two and finding the joy in life again. I think this is going to be a hard read, but I think it will also probably be very beautiful, and I'm hoping that it will be a book that I also feel very connected to, as I really, really love the Orkney Islands. And so yeah, I thought that that would be another really interesting memoir. I am drawn to each of them in very different ways. And I think that can be said for all of the books in this. I mean, there's so many different books that I've talked with you about today. Maybe too many books. I can already see how long this video is, and I know it's going to be an absolute beast to edit, but I hope that these books have shown you different areas that you might be interested in, or different books that you maybe didn't know about. I love learning more about the world and about different books, and I think that this kind of challenge for 2026 is a great way to push myself to read more, to learn more, and I hope that you are doing the same in your reading. If you are trying to read more nonfiction next year, I would love to hear about your goals for this, what books you have in mind. If you've read any of the books here, I would love to hear your thoughts on them. And thank you for sticking around for this very long video. I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that maybe you found some new reads to add to your shelves as well. Thank you so much for watching, and happy reading. Bye.